everybody, this is Noelle from Petitti Garden Centers, and we are going to do a spotlight on orchids today. Now, we're going to focus on Phalaenopsis type orchids, and I'll tell you why, because they are really, really cool, pretty easy to grow. But I'll kind of mention some of the other big orchid families as well, so you can become a little bit more familiar moving into different types of orchids besides the Phalaenopsis. We're going to include all of those great things, the light, the soil, the watering, the fertilizer, all of the things that you need to know about Phalaenopsis. And then we'll show you a couple different tricks and tips that you'll appreciate growing these guys. So to start out with, the Phalaenopsis orchid, Phalaenopsis comes from the Greek word. It's phalaena, I think, which means moth. And then opsis means like or an appearance of. So it's a moth-like orchid. So that's really cool. They were discovered, let's say the 1800s, sometime around there. A botanist was walking through, again, native to Southeast Asia, Australia, the tropical areas there and abouts. And the botanist was walking through and they thought that they were seeing actual moths flying over the area where a bunch of the Phalaenopsis orchids were, and hence it is the actual flower of that plant. They are not fragrant flowers. The Phalaenopsis really do not have a fragrance to them, but it's their appearance of being moth-like that is attracting pollinators. So when you do look at orchids close up, they are fascinating. And the reason that they are shaped the way that they are, and they're colored the way that they are, and their textures the way that they're formed, is really what makes this plant so cool. And it really goes down to pollination and attracting those pollinators so you can create more different types of orchids. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at orchid flowers and all the intricacies that go with them. Okay, with moth orchids, with Phalaenopsis orchids, first of all, the light. Now, these orchids, I should have started by saying, are beginner orchids. If you've never grown an orchid before, these are the best ones to start with. The reason being is that they grow so well indoors and their natural bloom time is over the winter months. So they are the most, I should say, low light tolerant. They do very, very well if you keep them on the drier side of watering. So if you're not a consistent waterer, this might be a really good plant for you. They don't need a ton of fertilizer to bloom, and they just kind of do their thing. So that's why we're going to talk about these today, and then I'll kind of expand into the others. So to start out with the light. Now, orchids in general do not need direct sunlight. Those big families that you commonly see, okay? And that includes Phalaenopsis orchids. They do not need direct sunlight. In fact, they will burn in direct sun, okay? So they want bright, indirect light. And normally what we would say is a wide open north-facing window. And that works really, really well. I want to tell you, we have a lot of good success with a wide open north-facing window. Just remember to clean your window, okay? Because the spottier it is, it really does diffuse that light and cut down on the light that the orchid's receiving. But the best exposure that I often read about is eastern exposure, again, away from the window. So you're getting some bright indirect lighting, but no direct sun in the morning through that eastern window, okay? They can be placed in western exposure, southern exposure. Again, you've got to place them back away from that window in order to not get direct sunlight on those leaves and on the flowers, okay? So just keep that in mind. Bright, indirect light is really, really great for them. Eastern exposure is always going to be really good. And lots of times when I look at Phalaenopsis orchid care, they actually assimilate the care of a Phalaenopsis orchid to an African violet, believe it or not. So if you can grow African violets, and typically they want to be in eastern exposure, that's the same place you'll do well with your Phalaenopsis orchids too. So keep that in mind. Water. Orchids are, especially the Phalaenopsis, they are what we call epiphytes or epiphytic plants, okay? And epiphytes are essentially air plants. They live on larger trees. They absorb a lot of nutrients from the air, the surrounding environment from them. And so when they're planted in pots, the way that we normally see them and sell them, of course, they are usually planted in a very coarse, barky mix, okay? And when you water them, you want to make sure that they're never sitting in that water, okay? That the water is meant to kind of percolate through their root system and come out through the drainage holes, okay? So when we water orchids, you wait until the orchids are dry. And if you're not really sure, stick your finger into their potting mix, see if any moisture is coming out or any potting mix is coming out on your finger. You can stick a pencil into that potting mix, see if any of the mix is coming out on the pencil. If you see any type of potting medium coming out on your finger or the pencil, that means there's still moisture in that soil, okay? So wait another day. Let them go to the drier side of watering before you re-water. Here's the thing. Orchids do have some roots in their pots, and I'll show you, but those roots do not want to be wet, okay? They do not want to sit in water. So when you do water, I usually talk about using water that's brought up to household temperature. So fill your watering can or your spray bottle the night before, let it come to room temperature, or use a lukewarm water from the kitchen sink. And then you'll go ahead and you'll water the leaves, the air roots, and also the potting media thoroughly. Let it filtrate and run right out the bottom of the pot. Do that one more time. Let it drain again all the way out the bottom of the pot, and then put the orchid back where you are placing it in that bright indirect light condition, okay? So let me show you that really quick, and I'm going to pick up this orchid right here, and I'll show you. You can see that there's air roots, so on top of the orchid soil here. And then also inside, you can see these kind of plump, juicy, sort of grayish green orchids. Now, if I were to pull, or orchids, roots, excuse me. If I were to pull this orchid out of this pot, it does have several drainage holes in the bottom. The bark mix would go everywhere, okay? So again, your soil mix should be well drained, should be loose, and it enables the air circulation and all of that water to run right through the orchid pot, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. I forgot something about watering, so I'm gonna bounce really quick back to watering, that there are a lot of orchids out there that have instructions for watering with ice cubes. And if it works for you, that's fine, okay? That is a fine method to use. However, many orchid growers and breeders would prefer that you use that room temperature water or lukewarm water. And honestly, with about a 5-inch orchid, standard size orchid, you're looking at maybe a 1/4 cup of water once a week, okay? And you'll see these directions on the Just Add Ice orchids. If you have a mini, which is like a 3-inch pot orchid, the minis are usually only about 3 tablespoons of water per week. So think about that. Again, your orchids really like to be on that drier side. And if you still feel moisture in that soil, don't water it. Wait another day, okay? They're always going to do better on the drier side, okay? Since we talked about watering and soil is typically a very chunky medium, and we'll show you a close-up of this product. This is Phalaenopsis orchid mix, okay? It is recommended by the American Orchid Society, and you can see all the different chunks that are in here. Everything from chunky peat to fir bark, which you commonly will see in orchid mix, charcoal pieces, okay? And then they also have some coarse perlite, some chunky white perlite in there. All of that chunkiness and coarseness, again, helps with the air circulation, the water drainage, so all those good things that orchids do need, especially your epiphytes, your epiphytic orchids, like Phalaenopsis. Okay, so do keep that in mind with your soil, okay, when you do select it. Every once in a while, you'll come across some orchids that maybe have been potted with a little bit of moss in with the bark. You can actually just do the same thing when you're repotting your orchid. And I was going to get this to a little bit later, but since we're talking about it, Phalaenopsis need to be repotted about once every 1 to 2 years, okay? You don't want all of their air roots to be sticking out and drying out up above. You still want some roots to be in that potting media, and the potting media will start to break down after a while. So do think about repotting after about a year or two that you have that orchid in that pot. You can move up to the next size pot. So if you start with a 4-inch, you can move up to a 5-inch and then go ahead and use fresh potting media to repot those air roots. Still leave some air roots out, and the ones that had been in the potting media can remain in the new potting media. Okay, so keep that in mind. Next thing that's really key with orchids is fertilizer. Fertilizing orchids, typically we look for a balanced food, which means that in the fertilizer ratio, the numbers are all the same. So let's say triple 20, 20, 20, 20. That would be a balanced fertilizer that you could use for orchids, okay? With orchid foods, you will see all different numbers. Just try to get to closest to the balanced orchid food. But if you're having problems with getting your orchids to rebloom again, sometimes you'll see a bigger middle number in the fertilizer ratio. That represents phosphorus, and phosphorus will push plants into more root growth, but also into more flowering growth too, okay? And we've mentioned this before with lots of different things like hydrangeas. When we're having problems with hydrangeas, we tend to push phosphorus into that fertilizer or get a higher percentage of phosphorus in the fertilizer to help with the blooming, okay? So you might see that with orchid fertilizers. The one that I do like is this Miracle Grow Orchid Spray. It is a balanced fertilizer. It is 0.02 of nitrogen, 0.02 of phosphorus, 0.02 of potassium. What's neat about it is you would use it once a week after you watered your orchid, okay? And then you would go ahead and you would spray the foliage and the air roots and the soil media, okay? You would do that once a week. So getting back to fertilizer, it's usually what we say weekly, meaning about a quarter dilution. So 25% of that active fertilizer, you're diluting it to, okay? So weekly, when you go and you water your Phalaenopsis orchids, that's when you want to add your fertilizer. And it's just going to be a weak solution. Even when they're blooming, it's not necessary, but you can apply it when they're blooming. But all the times when they are not blooming, definitely apply your fertilizer, okay? So orchids are going to be kind of one of those plants that's the exception to the rule with the fertilizers, that you do want to apply it pretty much year-round, even through the winter time, to just keep them going and actively growing through the entire year, okay? And we kind of say that about African violets too. We don't kind of say it, we do say it. So if you want your African violets to continue blooming, it's kind of a continuous sort of fertilizer cycle throughout the year. Okay, good. Plenty of orchid foods, we'll show you those. all different. And I think the liquids are always going to be the best for your orchids. Just avoid your flowers. Don't spray your flowers with orchid food, okay? That's going to make those flowers, and don't water your flowers either. That's going to make those flowers just expire faster for you. They might get spotty, might get burned in an area. So just don't do it. Okay, let's get back to like orchid care in general, but let's talk about humidity, because they are tropical plants. They come from Southeast Asia, and so they love humidity. So we want to keep our orchids away from any hot air vents, any cold air places or returns. We want them to be in a nice, bright, humid area. So if you want to take the humidifier and put it right on your orchids, no problem. They would love that. We're looking at anywhere between 50 to 70% humidity inside the home, and that's hard, especially in the winter when we have our heaters and furnaces really circulating all that hot air, okay? So a humidifier is great for your orchids. Of course, you can place them on a humidity tray, which is basically a saucer that is filled with pebbles or gravel, if you will. You fill that saucer and pebbles up with water, and then you set your orchid pots on top of the pebbles. You don't want them sitting in the water. You never want that. So go ahead and just set them on top of the pebbles. Let that water evaporate naturally, and that works really well. Group your orchids together. The more that you group your plants together, the more that they're going to keep each other humid. So that's always a good thing to do. And you can spray mist as well. If you enjoy spray misting, just make sure you do it in the morning so that the orchid has the entire day to use that misted water. And again, don't spray the flowers. Just spray the foliage, the air roots, and you don't even need to spray the top of their potting media, just the leaves and the air roots, and that would be great for them, okay? So lots of different ways to keep that humidity up, okay? Now, orchids, especially the Phalaenopsis, are one of the best, and I'm going to pull this out, are one of the easiest orchids to get to rebloom, okay? And we get questions about this all the time. And this Phalaenopsis orchid is a white, and as you can tell, it has two separate growing stems. And right at the bend of their stems, and I'm going to use this stem for instance, this is where the first flower came out and bloomed. So they'll come out in bud, and the most mature bud will start in the back where the bend in the stem is, and then it will start to create the other buds down to the tip of the flowering stem, and then they'll open one at a time. So this is the oldest bloom right here on the stem, and the rest of the blooms, of course, are a little bit younger as you move to the tip of the stem. So when these flowers start to fade back, and this one will probably expire first because it's the oldest, but I should say that Phalaenopsis orchids can bloom anywhere from a month to like 4 months. So they're really long bloomers, so long as you're caring for them and doing what you're supposed to do with growing them. But this one's going to fade first probably and sort of dry, and maybe it'll fall off or maybe you'll pop it off. And there'll be an active growing area that this flower came out. When all of the flowers have fallen off the stem, you're going to go back to this active growing area on the stem, and you're going to cut just above it. And that is where hopefully new flowering stems will shoot. And they usually will branch off. So in one spot, you usually can get 2 stems to come out and fork from that area. So hopefully when these orchids are done and we cut them back to just above where that first flower was formed at the bend of the stem, hopefully we'll get 2 shoots and 2 shoots. So hopefully we'll get 4 more flowering shoots from this Phalaenopsis. So that's going to be really cool as well. If for whatever reason your flowering stems are starting to dry and sort of brown, if you will, and you can tell they're dying back, they're not producing those forks, it's okay. You're actually going to cut that stem down to 2 nodes from the base of the plant, okay? So you can see these big nodes. They're right here, and we're just going to cut right above that second node, and hopefully we will get some new flowering stem growth coming out of the foliage. I should have mentioned when you're growing Phalaenopsis orchids, the foliage should be thick. It should be kind of rubbery. It should have a good bounce to it. You don't want Phalaenopsis that have droopy leaves or thin leaves, crinkly leaves. And the color, when healthy, should be kind of a yellow-green, sort of like an olive to yellow-green to it. If it's really, really dark green, that's not necessarily a good sign. Either not in enough sunlight or, again, possibly a little bit overwatered, so you'll have this very kind of dark color. If they turn yellow, or if they have sort of reddish edges on their foliage, that can indicate too much light, direct sunlight, okay? So do try to correct those conditions if you do see that on your orchid as well. Okay, Phalaenopsis, that's great. Did I mention room temperatures? Room temperatures should be anywhere where you're comfortable. So typically indoors, we like to see Phalaenopsis growing in temperatures anywhere between 55 to 85 degrees. Now, don't get me wrong, people aren't necessarily comfortable in 55-degree rooms, right? So what we want to see is that during the day, you have it up at maybe 65, 70 degrees, 75 degrees, okay. But what we need to see is that temperature drop for the evening. So if you keep the house at, let's say, 65 degrees, if you can drop it 10 degrees for Phalaenopsis orchids or more, 15 to 20 degrees, that's awesome because it helps them move into their bloom cycle. Did I mention that their active bloom cycle is actually during the winter? So again, when it's warmer in our homes or offices, and then it drops temperature at night, it actually will trigger these plants to move into that bloom cycle. So you should naturally see your Phalaenopsis orchid produce blooms in that kind of winter into late winter, early spring, sort of through that timeline. That's when they tend to bud and bloom the best for you, okay? So that's always something to look forward to. Other orchids that you might see, orchids like the bamboo orchid or dendrobium orchid. They look like that they're growing out of bamboo stalks, and then their flowering stems come out from those stalks. Those stalks are actually a pseudobulb that hold water for them. So again, a dendrobium orchid does not need a lot of water, only when they're younger and they're starting to develop and mature in their growth. But when they are fully mature and developed, they really do not require a lot of moisture. Again, absorbing a lot of humidity, nutrients from the air, and then you can fertilize them weekly again. Dendrobium orchids are actually really, they really like brighter light. So that's going to be one of those that I would move closer to that western or southern exposure. Again, with a sheer curtain, or if it's a dirtier window, that'll help in diffusing the light. They, again, like bright indirect light, but not necessarily that direct sunlight coming down on them. So do be aware of that with the dendrobiums. I should mention that Phalaenopsis orchids and dendrobium orchids are also really great air purifiers. So keeping them around the home in different rooms and areas really does help clean your air. It just works really nicely for you. Okay. The big corsage orchids, you might have seen these before. They are Cattleya orchids. The Cattleya orchids are usually very fragrant, extremely showy, And I do want to tell you that typically with the larger flowering cattleyas, they will take some time to develop. That's always how larger flowers go. It just takes a lot more energy to get them going. So again, they like to be like dendrobiums in that higher bright light category, okay? So again, western and southern exposure is really great for them. Again, with the diffused curtain, we don't want you to put them in direct light, but that kind of bright light is really where they like to be. Same room temperatures as your Phalaenopsis. If you're comfortable, they're comfortable. Again, they do like that 15 to 20 degree shift at night, cooler, so that helps them get back into their bloom cycle. And again, drier side of watering. So just be aware that these orchids really don't want to sit in moisture, be waterlogged by any means, okay? So keep that in mind. The oncidiums are sometimes called dancing ladies. And so you'll see oncidiums, they kind of have a bulbous pseudobulb again, and then they have these kind of strapped leaves, green strapped leaves, and then they kind of form skinny little stems with sprays of small orchids on them. One of the most popular ones is called Sherry Baby because it's supposed to smell like chocolate. And the oncidiums do have different sort of flavors, if you will, of fragrances. So they're really nice too if you're looking for a fragrant orchid, but just a little bit different. Again, oncidiums can be a little bit higher light again, but again, drier soil conditions with oncidiums. And sometimes it can take them a little bit longer to repeat bloom too. But, you know, again, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and, you know, fertilizing and watering and keeping the humidity up, they should do well for you too. The last orchid that I wanted to mention is the slipper orchid. Sometimes we call it a lady's slipper. That's the Paphiopedilum, and they are actually just as easy to grow as Phalaenopsis and African violets, since we mentioned it earlier. And that's a really cool orchid to try. They don't have near as many flowers because it's usually one stem, one flower on the top of that stem, but they are so intricately formed, beautiful colors, all those types of things. So look for the Paphiopedilums, and they're just so pretty and unique. But again, kind of lower light orchids, bright light again, northern, eastern exposure is really good for them, drier soils, all of that good stuff. So do keep that in mind, okay? What I wanted to mention earlier was that the symbolism of orchids, and especially with your Phalaenopsis, they do symbolize, again, love and purity and resilience and all those types of things, especially the whites, as you can tell, purity, grace. Those are wonderful symbols of that. The pinks up above symbolize romance, so that's always great to know. The purples are more like deep admiration and luxury, so that's interesting. And then if you find a yellow one, oh, I have a yellow behind me. If you find a yellow one, of course, this is a symbol of friendship. So that's always really, really nice, okay? So orchids, on the most part, in a nutshell, light, bright, indirect light, okay? Away or back from some sunny windows. Don't let the bright sun hit them, okay? Watering, you're going to water on the drier side. That's always where they're going to like it. Don't leave them sitting in water. Keep the humidity up. They love humidifiers. They love to be spray misted in the morning. They love humidity trays. So all of those things will really help them out in the long run. They're potting media because they are epiphytes or air plants. They really need a coarse, chunky mix that drains very, very readily, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. And then again, prune when you need to, and especially with the Phalaenopsis, prune right above that first flower, and after it's done blooming, and you'll be really happy, and hopefully you'll get some branching there too. Enjoy.